Jonathan Rabb, que se encuentra a mi izquierda, es probablemente uno de los novelistas norteamericanos menos norteamericanos que conozco. Y no estoy haciendo facilismos y tópicos baratos, le estoy hablando de su literatura. Después de dos afortunadas incursiones en novelas con una estructura que lo llevó a hacer un libro muy bien vendido y muy conocido en España, Jonathan Rabb escribió Rosa. Rosa fue la novela revelación de la Semana Negra de hace 2 años, recibió el premio especial del director y era una novela, a mi gusto, lo más interesante que se estaba escribiendo en novela negra en esos momentos en Estados Unidos.
It's always good to have someone like Paco in your corner, and he's been a great champion of mine, and I appreciate that greatly. I also want to thank Semana Negra for having me again. This is a remarkable book festival. It is one of a kind, and it inspires me. So I just want to thank you for having me back. And while most Europeans know a great deal about her, she is virtually unknown in the United States outside of academic circles, which is something of a crime. We all know her as the great revolutionary, the woman who, with Karl Liebknecht, took Germany in 1918 to the brink of a socialist state with a socialist revolution. So I had Berlin. And the reason Berlin intrigued me as a character, it's very rare in history to find a city that is in the middle of an identity crisis. In 1919, Berlin is searching for its identity. It doesn't know what it's going to be. It's no longer Wilhelmine Germany, the Kaisers in the Netherlands having run away. It's not yet Weimar Germany. So there is this wonderful tension, this conflict that is going on inside Berlin itself as it struggles to find out what it is going to be. So these are the two elements that drew me to Rosa. So as I began to write the story, and I discovered my main character, Nikolai Hoffner, who is a detective in the criminal Polizei in Berlin, and I discovered his relationship with his sons and his wife, I realized I had an opportunity. I realized I had an opportunity to look at the decay and the despair that overtakes Berlin between the wars as a reflection of the decay and the despair that overtakes Hoffner and his relationship with his sons. It was a chance to look at that larger arc from 1919 to 1936 and understand it from the personal side, from this man and his son. And realizing that, as everything in history and in literature is, I realized I had to write 3 books. Everything always comes in 3s. So what I needed to do was find 3 moments that were emblematic of that decay. Obviously, I already had 1919 with Rosa. And I knew, because Hoffner is a half-Jew, that I needed to have the last story, the last book, take place after the Nuremberg laws go into effect in 1935. The Nuremberg laws are the racial laws in Germany. So I knew I would have to do something probably in 1936. But with Sombras y Luces, I had to find a moment in Weimar when I could, as I said, explore that spiral. There were 2 elements that I knew I needed to include in that middle book. I wanted to make sure that the specter of American globalization was very prevalent in the book. After the First World War, when America comes in and makes the world safe for democracy, America was very interested in getting its fingers into every industrial pie it could throughout Europe. How things have changed. American industrialization, American globalization. Of course, they haven't changed. But at that time, Germany, coming off the hyperinflation, coming off the reparations that they were still paying, was ripe for the picking. And I needed to come up with something as the backdrop for the book that was emblematic of American business interests. And what has always been the face of American industry, its happiest face, has always been Hollywood. Even now, that is how America sells itself. And yet, even though Hollywood obviously was the height of film, the most innovative film studio in the world at the time was not in America. It was in Germany, UFA. At UFA you had arguably the greatest directors anywhere in the world. You had Fritz Lang, you had Murnau, you had Pabst, you had Lubitsch. A number of them eventually went to America, but they were there at the time in Weimar creating UFA. You also had the beginning of expressionist film. This was created at UFA, and it wasn't just the way the picture looked or the technology. It was the way that the narrative was told. It was the way stories were being told that the Germans were reshaping. And of course, for Semana Negra, it's perfect. At that moment in Weimar, German film directors are creating the genre we know as noir. We now think of noir as Los Angeles and Raymond Chandler. No, Raymond Chandler was stealing from what Fritz Lang had done, looking at Weimar Berlin. Berlin is a place in the 20s. Unprecedented freedoms. Sexual freedoms, intellectual freedoms, artistic freedoms, political freedoms. All of that freedom, that was the grit and the grind that made noir possible. So I knew that one element had to be the backdrop was the German film industry. The other was something, a seed that I planted in Rosa, and of course it had to be the rising influence of the National Socialist movement, the Nazis. They weren't the Nazis then, they were still the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But I needed to have that element of thuggery still rising in the backdrop of the story. And what I recognized was that I had the perfect opportunity to write a noir story at the very moment that noir is being created. What could be better? I had all the elements. I had the world-weary detective. I had, as Paco said, the femme fatale coming over from the United States, whom you can never trust. I have the Nazi thugs. There are media moguls. Alfred Hugenberg is in it. It was the perfect setting to play with this story and to continue exploring how Berlin kept on going down and down and down. The big question, of course, was how do I end the trilogy? I knew it was 1936. And when I was last at Semana Negra, I was just at the beginning of writing Sombras y Luces. And while I was here, there happened to be an exhibition of letters from the very first part of the Spanish Civil War. And I went and looked at that exhibition, and I suddenly realized where I needed to place the last of the three books. By 1936, my main character, Hoffman, it's impossible for him to be in Berlin psychologically and emotionally. His Berlin doesn't exist anymore. But in Spain, at the very beginning of the Civil War, there are the same political tensions, the same social tensions, but they are playing out on a much more violent field. And so I suddenly realized while I was here, I can thank Semana Negra for my third book, I knew where I had to place that last book. It is the first of the first 2 weeks, but from August 1st, 1936 to August 15th, here in Spain.
You can do that?
No, there is a character who is based on Paco.
But from Gijón.
El diálogo va poco más o menos así, Paco. O sea que ya has entregado el manuscrito, ¿no? ¿Y hace mucho? Hará unas 2 semanas. ¿Y todavía puedes hacer algún cambio? Sí, a lo mejor, lo tiene mi editora. ¿Por qué? ¿Pero puedes hacer algún cambio, introducir algo? Sí, ¿qué es lo que quieres? Nos gustaría a todos los aquí presentes, creo que introduzcas un cambio pequeñito, un casi nada, hacer que uno de los personajes sea de Gijón. Pero ¿cómo voy a hacer que mi personaje vaya a Gijón y luego Barcelona y luego para abajo? No hace falta que venga a Gijón. Con que uno de los secundarios sea un personaje de Gijón, ya nos vale a todos. Bueno, a ver qué es lo que puedo hacer. Si se llama Paco, tampoco pasa nada, ¿eh? No, que sepáis que uno de los personajes sí está inspirado en la figura de Paco Traidores.
Y es de Gijón.
All right, it's from
Y es de Gijón.
Muchas gracias. Esto es la Semana Negra y sigue.
I hope it does sell a lot.
Yes. Well, I've just sold a lot in 3 seconds, so, you know.
I like that. That's the best talent.